This is the U.S. Report with James Morrow.
Good evening and welcome to the program. Coming up tonight, the U.S. government accused of a major cover-up as a new report reveals what we've suspected all along. The Democrats were spying on Donald Trump during his 2016 election campaign. Plus, Tim Scott joins Donald Trump at a rally in South Carolina. Could he be Trump's running mate pick? Mick Mulvaney joins me shortly to reveal what he thinks. And bombshell revelations against Fani Willis and the prosecutor trying to take on Trump in Georgia. You're not going to want to miss this. But first, the last time we got together, we shared a bit of a collective gasp at Joe Biden's absolutely shocking performance at that press conference at the White House. You know, the one where he insisted against all the advice of his aides that he would go have a crack at the special counsel who all but called him senile. And then he went on to mix up Egypt and Mexico and a few other things besides. Now, look, we all know that Joe Biden is in decline, and let me show you how much so. Here's a clip of Joe Biden speaking in 2016 when he first ran for president, followed by a look at the man just a few days ago.
Not only do we have the largest economy in the world, we have the strongest economy in the world. We have the most productive workers in the world. And given a fair shot, given a fair chance, Americans have never, ever, ever, ever let their country down.
You know, right after I was elected, I went to what they call a G7 meeting, all the NATO leaders. It was in the south of England. And I sat down and I said, America's back. And Mitterrand from France looked at me and said, you know, how long are you back for?
Now, Francois Mitterrand, of course, wasn't at that meeting at all that Biden was talking about because, unfortunately, he was dead. And the spectacle of Democrat surrogates coming out and saying that behind the scenes, well, Joe Biden is fine, just fine, is now becoming something of a joke, even with the likes of Jon Stewart saying, as Joe Biden himself would say, come on, man.
If you're telling us behind the scenes he is sharp and full of energy and on top of it and really in control and leading, you should film that. That would be good to show to people instead of a TikTok where he goes, chocolate chip cookie. We see he's in charge. You see, I like cookies.
Funny, but let's be really honest about this. Just because Joe Biden is a mess does not mean the Republican Party is going to sweep into the White House in November or win unassailable congressional majorities come the election. Because it's time for some real talk here. Donald Trump and every Republican candidate up and down the ticket still has a lot of work to do between now and November. Remember the 22 red wave that wasn't? Well, there were more signs this week that Republicans still haven't closed the deal with the electorate. Special elections in New York State, Pennsylvania, and Oklahoma all saw Democrats pick up seats either in Congress or state houses or just generally do better than they were expected to. And let's be honest about this, too. Donald Trump, for all of his characteristics, can be his and the Republicans' own worst enemy sometimes. I think it was Napoleon who said, never interrupt your enemy when he is in the course of making a mistake. And after Joe Biden's disastrous press conference last week, all Trump had to do was get out of the way. But he should have known that his comments about NATO allies, perfectly reasonable ones, by the way, about the need for Europe to pull its weight defense-wise, would be seized upon by an absolutely terrible media looking to portray Trump as Vladimir Putin's best buddy. And by the way, for the record, Biden, not Trump, is Putin's reported pick. Wonder why. But to win this election, Trump has to internalize the lessons of the 2020 campaign, the one he lost. He needs to get out of the way of Joe Biden's slow-motion collapse and then be ready to come in and pick up the pieces as a natural alternative. Because, hey, do people really want Kamala Harris and her yellow school buses? Gavin Newsom in his third world California? Not on your life. Look, elections can be funny things, and I've spent my whole life watching U.S. politics and seeing Republicans go one way and the polls go the other. There was no way a sleaze like Bill Clinton was supposed to beat war veteran Bob Dole, who in his frustration famously shouted, "Where's the outrage?" Barack Obama was nothing but an empty suit who somehow rose without trace of the Oval Office, and yet we know how that turned out. Joe Biden pretty clearly is in some stage of age-related mental decline, and as vice president, well, let's just say it's a good thing old cackling Kamala has her own full-time driver because she should not be behind the wheel. Trump and Republicans need to get out of the way of Joe Biden's downhill run, yes, but they also then need to articulate just what making America great again will look like. Well, joining me now is Fox News commentator and host of Tommy Lauren is Fearless on Outkick, none other than the great Tommy Lauren. Tommy, welcome to the show. All this week we've seen Democrats out there hitting the party line, saying Joe Biden is doing great, he's vigorous, he's thinking clearly, and he's translating Homer from the original Greek for fun in his spare time. How much longer, Tommy, do you reckon they can keep up this charade?
Well, I would reckon probably until the next time that Joe Biden speaks to the press or maybe goes off script. I mean, even if he's on script, quite honestly, it's still, anyone's guess as to what he's going to say. But listen, the Democrats don't really believe that Joe is doing well. They don't really believe in his cognitive ability. They just have to hold water for Joe for maybe a few months longer until they can replace him. But there are many that are coming out of the woodwork finally and actually speaking the truth about his physical and mental abilities, and expect to see a lot more of that as we head into the summer and as we head into the Democratic National Convention.
Well, Tommy, I thought this pretty interesting that Vice President Kamala Harris, well, she said that she is ready to serve, God help us all, amid the mounting concerns over the president's age and mental capacity. And during an interview with the Wall Street Journal, she said, quote, "I am ready. There's no question about that," and said everyone who sees her on the job walks away fully aware of her capacity to lead. Now, what do you make of this? I mean, this is a woman who's normally talking about Venn diagrams and yellow school buses. Would that still be a step up from Joe Biden?
That's the tough spot that the Democrat Party is in, because you've got Joe Biden that can likely use his dementia and his cognitive failings as an excuse. But Kamala Harris does not have that excuse. She's just, quite frankly, lazy and bad at her job. And when she says she's ready to lead, I mean, 2 words for you: southern border. That was the first job she was tasked with, as being the border czar. And you can see how well that's working out for our country. But the thing that bothers me most about Kamala Harris is that she doesn't even seem to try to do the job. Just last week, she had an event where she was talking about gun violence, and once again, she served up a word salad. She doesn't do her homework. She doesn't attempt to do her job. She doesn't attempt to put anything together that even remotely makes sense or even conveys a message at all. So she doesn't want the job. So she might say that she's ready if Joe isn't the nominee. Some say that she's the next in line. But I quite honestly don't think she wants the job, because if she wanted the job, she would try harder to convince us she was ready for it. Beyond just saying she is, she hasn't given us any proof of that.
Well, of course, there's always a possibility, Tommy, that she's just, as you say, not very capable. But we might have to just leave that one there to the side. But I am glad that you mentioned the border issue, because this week we've seen New York City Mayor Eric Adams. Now, remember, he was the guy who said New York is a sanctuary city. Now he's warning that the city has run out of room thanks to the migrant crisis. Have a listen to this.
What happens when there's no more room? I mean, we're almost at capacity now, right?
No, we're there. We're not just saying we're out of room as a soundbite. We're out of room, literally. People are going to be eventually sleeping on the streets.
Okay, what would it take for you to close the front door?
I don't have the authorization to tell people they can't come into New York City.
Why not?
It's against the law.
Tommy, I don't have a lot of sympathy for the guy here. I mean, this is exactly what he wanted and what the left wanted, right?
Right, and make no mistake, these Democrats, these mayors, these governors, these leaders, they don't actually want to secure the border. They simply want more federal funding as they welcome in more migrants and illegal immigrants. And what I thought was really interesting about what he said is that people would soon be sleeping on the streets. I'm not sure if he's aware that there are Americans, namely veterans, American veterans, that are already sleeping on the streets. And there have been Americans that have been pushed out of shelters and pushed out of housing to house illegal immigrants. So when he says people are going to be sleeping on the street, I'm not so sure he's aware of the fact that there are many people that are currently sleeping on the street, and they have every legal right to be in this country. So all of this is an abomination. It all starts with poor leadership. The Democrats don't want to fix the problem because they want to keep themselves in power, and they know by ushering in millions of illegals, giving them voting rights and amnesty, that's their way to secure their power for generations or eternity to come. So every time they cry these crocodile tears, I'm sorry, I'm not buying it.
Well, Tommy, you're right about, I think, the long-term voting strategy, but also let's remember the way congressional seats are apportioned. It doesn't matter if the residents are here legally or illegally. That can wind up also getting a state more congressional seats and more electoral votes. But also, there's this other issue, too, on the southern border, which is newly released figures by Customs and Border Protection show that the number of Chinese migrants who've been coming across the southern border has surged, with sources saying that there's been more than 20,000 Chinese nationals crossing illegally since October, a 500% increase from this time last year. This would seem to have a huge national security implication, doesn't it?
It sure would. You know, actually, just today I talked to our Fox News international correspondent, Griff Jenkins, on this issue. He's in California right now, where most of the Chinese are coming through. And he said after speaking to a lot of these migrants, they're telling him that they're coming to the United States to work. So once again, they're coming for economic reasons. That's the best case scenario. If they have other, national security issues and risks, that's a whole nother can of worms that I don't even want to open. But if they're just coming here for economic reasons, that also goes against this whole notion that these people that are coming are asylum seekers and refugees. They're simply not. So the fact that people are gaming the system and getting away with it, national security implications on our resources, not sustainable, but we don't see an end in sight anytime soon.
Yeah, and finally, too, to another sort of migration issue that ties into what's happening in the Middle East, Joe Biden, or Joe Biden's office, let's say, not him necessarily, has ordered an 18-month pause on the removal of certain Palestinians in the U.S., and there's also talk going around that Biden may be trying to push for a Palestinian state, which I think would just be an absolute reward for Hamas. How much of this is driven by those sort of electoral politics where states with a high Palestinian or high Muslim population are driving basically domestic policy now in this Democrat White House?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look no further than Michigan, where Joe Biden is not doing well because he hasn't come out, I guess, in enough support of the Palestinian people, a.k.a. in a lot of regards, what that means is actually Hamas and Hamas sympathizers. So he's taking a lot of flack from young people who don't know what they're talking about, as well as some communities that are really pushing for more recognition of Gaza, but also wanting to send more aid to the Palestinians. And again, when we talk about this issue, it's so frustrating because everybody wants people to have humanitarian aid that need it. Everybody wants people that are in war-torn nations to be okay, innocent civilians. Unfortunately, Hamas has shown us time and time again that when you give resources to people that actually need it, it actually goes into the hands of terrorists. So this is really no different here, but this is all about votes. This is all about winning certain populations, but he's going to have a real struggle on his hands because there's no way he's going to be able to appease both sides, and he's going to have to make up his mind pretty soon on that issue. And I think he's got one foot in the door and one foot out. Unfortunately, that's not going to work out too well for him.
Tommy Lahren, you said he's got to make up his mind, but the question is, what sort of mind does he have? Thank you so much for your time. We'll see you soon again here on the U.S. Report.
Thanks so much.
And now we're joined by U.S. Report regular former White House Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor at Bondi Partners, Mick Mulvaney. Mick, thanks for coming on the show. And I want to ask you about something I talked about at the top of the show. And that's basically that Republicans should not get complacent. There were a bunch of special elections, or by-elections as we call them, in the U.S. over the past week. And an important one was in New York, where Democrat candidate Tom Suozzi won a special election to replace George Santos. Now, Democrats also did well in Pennsylvania, and they did well in Oklahoma. Mick, I'm a little concerned here because I remember the red wave back in 2022 that never happened. Is there a danger that if Joe Biden is sort of on the nose here with voters for all of his cognitive problems, the Democrat brand may still be compelling? What is your analysis of this?
Yeah, James, it's always good to see you. Thanks for having me. This was a big deal. It was a loss for the Republicans. This was a seat they used to hold with George Santos. Of course, the margins are so tight in the House of Representatives right now, they can't afford to lose any seats. So this is a big loss for them. It's especially important because of the way that Tom Suozzi won this race. He ran on closing the southern border. That's a Democrat running against immigration. That's very, very difficult to do in this country. But if the Democrats figure out a way to take an issue that's on the front of everybody's minds right now and make it their issue, that's a game changer here. Ordinarily, 99 times out of 100, immigration, when that's an issue, plays to the Republican strength. But in this particular circumstance, Tom Suozzi ran ads that were described as more Trump than Trump. If the Democrats start changing their messaging on the southern border, they could have a very successful November of 2024. So yes, everyone's watching this result very closely.
Yeah, and in fact, I think Tom Suozzi even used the I word, invasion, at one point. And when you tie this into how the Democrats sort of successfully portrayed the Republicans as being obstructionist on what I thought was a very bad border bill, tactically, are the Republicans in danger here of getting outplayed on this issue?
You know, in danger, yes. It's certainly a long way until November, and they have a lot of opportunities. We are leading in what's called the generic ballot. I say we, the Republicans. That's when you just ask people, are you tending to vote, you expect to vote Republican or Democrat? They're up by 10 or 12 points on that nationwide, which is really, really good for Republicans. Put that in sort of in context. In 2010, during the massive Tea Party wave, that generic ballot was about 8% pro-Republican. So there's some good numbers for Republicans, but they are losing these special elections. Special elections are always outliers. They always have a chance. It's usually low turnout and huge sums of money. Nearly, I think, $50 million was spent on this single race. So it's not necessarily a trend, but it's certainly got everybody's attention.
Yeah, I think some people in Victoria around Dunkley are going to be talking about these sort of special elections over the next few weeks. But I want to move over to this Russia issue here, which I thought was absolutely fascinating here. A top U.S. official has warned of a serious national security threat around a potential nuclear capability in space that would violate the Outer Space Treaty and potentially be destabilizing. But I found the politics of this fascinating because I remember back in 2021 when Biden's top spokesperson mocked the idea of a space force.
They asked whether the president has made a decision on keeping the scope of Space Force.
Wow, Space Force. It's the plane of today. It is an interesting question. I am happy to check with our Space Force point of contact. I'm not sure who that is. I will find out and see if we have any update on that.
I mean, I thought that was very, very glib given what's happened now a couple of years later. But what's your take? And how much of this is politics? And how much of this is stuff that we should really be concerned about, some new Russian capability, do you think, Mick?
Yeah, James, I'll give you some inside information because I'm here in Washington. I've been talking to people on the Hill the last 24 hours since this story broke. There's a lot more politics on both sides of the aisle here than people realize. People are telling me this has more to do with the politics of the foreign aid bill, money for Ukraine and for Israel, and for the FISA bill, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and that this was sort of promoted by a Republican pro-FISA, pro-Ukraine member to try and drive a discussion in favor of funding for Ukraine and for extending our Foreign Intelligence Act and so forth. So there's a lot of politics here on both sides of the aisle. By the way, in the last hour or so, the White House has confirmed that this does deal with nuclear capabilities of the Russians in outer space. It's a very serious deal. But we had I talked to a member of the House Republican Intelligence Committee yesterday, and he said he saw the exact same materials. It's important, but it's not immediately pressing. He said this is not a clear and present risk. So I think your gut feeling is probably right. This has more to do right now with politics than real capabilities.
Yeah, that's, I guess, on some level a little bit reassuring. But let's move back to domestic politics here. and South Carolina, where Tim Scott has joined Donald Trump on stage amid rumors that he could possibly be a Trump running mate. Now, they were campaigning in South Carolina ahead of the GOP primary there next week. What do you reckon? Is he a shot for Veep? You know Tim Scott well.
I know Tim very well. Again, I'm from South Carolina. I know Nikki Haley very well. By the way, Nikki Haley is losing her home state right now to Donald Trump by more than 30 points with about 10 days left. Early voting has actually started now in South Carolina. Tim Scott, originally, I did not have him on my list to be potential vice president. But keep in mind, he had the perfect excuse not to endorse Donald Trump until after South Carolina. Nikki Haley literally gave him a Senate seat about 10 years ago, and he affirmatively chose to endorse Donald Trump before the South Carolina primary. To me, that's a giant sort of flare that says he wants to be the vice president. So I've now added him to my list. My list is Elise Stefanik, a white female member of Congress, Kristi Noem, a white female governor of South Dakota, Ben Carson, a Black American former member of the cabinet, and Tim Scott, the Black American senator. So that's my list of 4 potentials right now. Tim Scott was not on that list just 2 weeks ago.
Big news there out of South Carolina. Mick Mulvaney, thank you so much, as always, for your time. Now, we're going to take a short break, and when we return, Sean Spicer is going to explain how the Democrats used the CIA to spy on the Trump campaign. But remember, of course, it's Donald Trump who's the threat to democracy and norms. But before we do that, it's the holy season of Lent, when observant Catholics like Joe Biden give up pleasures to bring themselves closer to God. So, what's the president giving up this year for Lent?
What are you giving up for Lent?
President Biden,
he's giving up the press for Lent. I'm sure talking to journalists is, of course, one of his great pleasures. Massive sacrifice there, Mr. President. Of course, the question is, does that mean we're going to get even fewer press conferences than usual? I guess for his sake, if only Ash Wednesday was a week earlier, he could have avoided that whole debacle with the special counsel press conference. CIA shenanigans are next. Welcome back to the program. In a moment, we'll be talking about the incredible revelations about Biden family corruption that have been ignored by law enforcement. Maybe because some of those same agencies that were involving Joe Biden were more interested in spying on Donald Trump. But first, I want to introduce you to some American liberals who actually aren't hypocrites when it comes to illegal immigration. Not only are they in favor of the open borders policies that have seen the U.S. flooded with migrants, they're taking them into their homes.
Colin and Jessica Stokes called the state to sign up to be a host family. It took less than an hour for the displaced migrants to be dropped off at their door.
I got to get sheets on the bed. How many people are coming? Right. Where are they from? What ages? We really knew nothing.
The need is so clearly overwhelming.
The family of 4 who didn't want to go on camera had been sleeping at Logan Airport. The parents and 2 kids journeyed from Chile to Texas, then Massachusetts, and there are so many stories like it.
It boggles the mind that there are so many hundreds of those stories.
But wait, there's more. Because here's another family that has done the same thing and turned it into a source of free labor.
It's a delight, and it's really fun having them. What I realized is there's so much prejudice against refugees, mostly because people don't know them.
Lisa says she feels like she has her own personal chef, as Wildande loves cooking.
Her own personal chef, just for taking in refugees. Oh my God, unpaid domestic service is now woke. Well, I guess the Democrats always were the party of slavery. Joining me now is former White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer. Sean, thank you so much for joining us on the program here. I want to start off with some of the stuff around the Donald Trump trials here. We've had a date set in the Trump hush money case, and jury selection is to begin on March 25th for a 6-week trial. This is perilous, but I think this case around Stormy Daniels and the money to her is pretty ridiculous. I mean, the idea that paying off a mistress is somehow election interference. He's running for president, not pope. But what's your take, Sean?
Well, it's worse than that, James. To be honest with you, I mean, this was a misdemeanor bookkeeping offense. That's what it was classified in New York under. The district attorney there, Alvin Bragg, compiled some other misdemeanor charges to make it a felony. But in the U.S., it had passed what we call the statute of limitations. You couldn't even prosecute it as it stood. At the same time, Bragg has been going around taking felony crimes and prosecuting them at the misdemeanor level for things that actually affect people. This was clearly the weaponization of the judicial system. There's no, I mean, I get why people don't mind it, because a lot of people, especially in New York, don't like Donald Trump. But the idea that we've used the judicial system in so many different ways and overlooked basic judicial tenets, statute of limitations, what a misdemeanor is versus trying to make it a felony, is just proof positive that there's a two-tier justice system in the United States.
Well, Sean, this is the real concern, though. I mean, if the prosecutors can go down this road, and everything you say there is absolutely correct, you go to a jury. It's a New York jury. Now, I'm from New York. I talk to New Yorkers all the time, and I know how a lot of New Yorkers feel about Donald Trump. What are the odds that this ridiculous, trumped-up, so to speak, misdemeanor charge could actually put him in real legal jeopardy if they get 12 people on a jury to say, oh, this is our big chance to nail Trump?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's no jury that won't convict him in New York. It's like the one in D.C. To find 12 people that don't fully agree. I mean, D.C., and I know it's a little different in New York, but it's not far off. D.C. votes 95 to 98% Democrat. Like, you're not going to get a fair shake in either jurisdiction. So, one, I don't have any doubt in my mind that they'll get a conviction. It doesn't even matter what they're being asked to do. The answer that they said before the trial start was, sure, yes, guilty. What was he charged with? They didn't even care to find that out before they rendered a decision. So he's going to get found guilty. The upside is twofold. One, he will appeal. And two is I think most voters are going, so let me get this straight. This is a bookkeeping offense. It's a misdemeanor. It's not really going to affect anybody's decision to how to vote. Obviously, in many cases, the indictments themselves have actually increased his popularity among his base. And I think for a variety of independent voters, they see through it as well.
Yeah, look, I hope you're right here, but it does feel very much like the old Stalin saying about show me the man and I'll show you the crime. But I want to go to another one of these cases here, which is what's happening down in Georgia. And there's been some wild developments in Georgia in the election interference case where District Attorney Fani Willis looks set to be disqualified. The whole case into Donald Trump's alleged election interference is in jeopardy now over claims she had an improper relationship with a prosecutor she had brought on, Nathan Wade. Now, there's a lot of allegations of financial impropriety, conflict of interest, including today we learned that Wade allegedly paid for trips for the two of them together on his corporate card, and she reimbursed him in cash. Sean, what is happening here? And, I mean, this whole thing just stinks to high heaven.
Well, let's be clear about a couple of things. They're free to have any relationship that they want. What this really comes down to is what you just pointed out, that he was getting paid. He's not in their office. He was brought on as a special prosecutor to help with cases that weren't enumerated as having to do with Donald Trump at all. Then this guy bills for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and at the same time is taking her on expensive trips, cruises, etc. And he's saying, well, no, don't worry. That's not a payoff because she's reimbursing me in cash. And then when on the stand today, she's saying, well, I keep a ton of cash up to $15,000 in my house. He doesn't have any receipts for where.
Let's actually play. I've got a little grab of this here. Let's have a look at this because I think viewers really ought to see this. Have a look at this.
Yes, ma'am. So let's talk about both of those. I know he initially paid for it. Did you pay him back?
For the cruise and for Aruba. Yeah, I gave him his money before we ever went on that trip.
You gave him cash before you ever went on the trip?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so when you got cash to pay him back on these trips, would you go to the ATM?
No, lady.
You would not go to the ATM?
No.
Okay.
So saying no, lady, to the attorney questioning her, this seems, I mean, the whole thing just seems bizarre.
The reason, just so we're clear, the reason she's asking her about the ATM is, hey, do you have a paper trail showing, the trip was January 1st, here I am on January 2nd taking the cash out of an ATM, right, to show that there's a trail of this. So she says, no, of course I didn't go to the ATM or whatever. I just had it lying around. Then they ask him, Mr. Wade, where was this cash? Did you deposit it into the bank like a normal human being? And he's like, no. where was it? I don't, might have just been in my pocket. So she has no trail of her getting the money. He has no trail of him. But we should supposed to just, it doesn't pass the smell test. So one person has a ton of cash just sitting around their house. The other person gets that, a bunch of that cash and just kind of puts it in their pocket. And that's what we're supposed to believe. That is really what this comes down to. Did Fani Willis put her boyfriend on the payroll to go after these guys at an exorbitant amount of money, and then he's saying, hey, thanks a lot, let's go on a cruise and I'll take care of it?
Yeah, well, exactly right. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, it's like, as you say, adults can have whatever relationships they like, but if there's some personal romantic relationship that compromises his being hired, that puts the whole question against Trump in jeopardy here. But I did love this here from Fani Willis, where she was asked to characterize the nature of their relationship. Have a look at this.
I have had conversations with him since you filed the motion, but they wouldn't be substantive to this. He sent me very nice sermons that have been done.
Apparently they were just sending each other sermons.
Look, the look on her face throughout that entire courtroom appearance said it all. She was pissed that she had to be there and explain herself to him. And it's funny, this goes to all these folks on the left. They believe that they are above the law, that they can do what they want if they're pursuing people on the right, but they don't believe that they have to abide by the law themselves, right? Mr. Wade was asked several questions about his billing practices, how he paid for things on a corporate card versus a personal card, cash versus not cash. And they just are so dismissive of this. They don't think that they have to abide by any of the same rules, and that they found it so appalling that they had to answer these questions today.
Well, I mean, Sean, you could even say that maybe just some of those are bookkeeping misdemeanors. I don't know. But I want to move on, though, to this other other incredible story here, where the U.S. government is being accused of hiding documents that incriminates the intelligence community for spying and election interference on the Trump campaign as far back as 2016. Michael Schellenberger, on his Substack account, revealed that the CIA asked foreign allies to spy on 26 associates of Donald Trump in the lead up to the 2016 election, which triggered the allegations that Trump's campaign had falsely been colluding with Russia. Now, Trump's been saying this for years. No one listened. What do you make of all of this?
I just, as somebody who was there at Trump Tower throughout the campaign, the funny thing is, prior to our victory, the narrative was that we couldn't collude with ourselves, that we were a bunch of bozos, that, it was a joke what we were doing. Then we win, and it's like, well, of course you couldn't have actually pulled this off. It must have been some outside entity. And we keep peeling back that onion, year after year, month after month, and we find out what the underlying documents were, the Steele dossier, the amount of information, the 51 intelligence agencies that dismissed Hunter Biden's laptop falsely. There is this, you cannot help but look at the mountain of evidence that's there and really wonder what was going on prior to the lead up of that election. And to your point, it's these journalistic endeavors that find pieces out. And whenever it happens, you notice that it wasn't NBC News or ABC News or the Washington Post or the New York Times. It's these independent journalists that aren't afraid to reveal the actual truth of what's going on. The bigger question, though, that I have is there going to be any accountability? We saw this entire thing with the Steele dossier and the Mueller report. How many people's lives were ruined? How many millions of dollars were in billable hours to lawyers to prove something that never existed?
Yeah, and it was really, I guess, Sean, undermining democracy. Very quickly, what's about all this talk about a binder of documents that would have incriminated intelligence agencies that might have been the real target of the Mar-a-Lago raid?
Well, look, here's what I've realized is that over the last, 6-7 years, that, what normally would have been out of the scope of even normal thought process is now something that every one of these things needs to be investigated, and we need to get answers. And it's amazing how many things that if you had told me in 2016 that there was going to be a dossier compiled that was peddled by the opponent's campaign and yet credibly viewed by the FBI and the other intelligence agencies, I would have said you're crazy. It was funny. Just one quick anecdote. I was actually, because I maintain a security clearance, I was in the room when Donald Trump was briefed by the intelligence agencies after our election. I think it was January 6, 2016. I was in that room. I was part of the briefing. I watched Director Comey go up to him afterwards and talk about what became known as Annex A, the Steele dossier. And yet I would have reporters call me and tell me what happened in that meeting. And I'd say, no, that's not true. I was there. And they were like, well, we have sources. And I'd say there were 6 people in that room, 7 people, 8 people in the room. That's just not true. They've been sold a bill of goods. The American press has been weaponized against Trump and all of these folks on the right, and they just continue to make up false narratives. They suppress things, as we saw in the last election. They're colluding with big tech. It continues to give us pause and undermine confidence in all these institutions, especially our own government.
Sean Spicer, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time, your insights, and your analysis, Sean Spicer. Now, in a moment, we're going to be talking to Carol Markowitz about, guess what, how anti-Semitism is still a big problem on university campuses. But first, that disastrous Biden press conference from last week is still making waves. And it's inspired a new Trump campaign ad. Have a look.
It's official. Joe Biden mishandled classified documents, and now his two-tiered justice system is on full display. The Department of Justice found Joe retained and disclosed classified documents, including matters of national security and intelligence sources and methods. He put America's national security at risk and then lied about it.
I did not share classified information. I did not share.
And after all that, Biden's special counsel still declined to indict him because he was, quote, an elderly man with a poor memory and diminished faculties who didn't even remember when he was vice president. Joe Biden, unfit to stand trial, unfit to lead America.
Unfit indeed. Carol Markowitz after the break. Welcome back to the program. And in yet another example of how anti-Semitism is being injected into American educational institutions, news out of Washington State, where Democratic state lawmakers have slipped a pro-Hamas amendment into a bill that is designed to ensure that school students learn about the Holocaust. Now, seems unbelievable to me, but to tell me all about it, tell us all about it, is New York Post columnist Carol Markowitz. Carol, thank you so much for coming on the U.S. Report this week. Now, tell us about this amendment. What is going on here, and why can't the Holocaust just be taught without bringing Hamas into it?
Well, I don't know if you guys watched the Super Bowl in Australia, but we just had the Super Bowl, and there was an ad during that time. It's a very popular time to have advertisements, and the ad was a $7 million ad against anti-Semitism. But included in that ad was all hate. And there was a piece of the ad where there was an anti-Muslim comment, etc. It just seems like the left is, in general, not just the left, maybe other branches of American life as well, uncomfortable with pointing out Jew hatred and Jew hatred alone. And so what these Washington lawmakers are doing is somewhat clever, because what they're saying is, we're going to include other nonsense in this Holocaust bill, and then when you oppose it, should you oppose it, you will be, deemed hateful yourself, because how dare you oppose a Holocaust bill? So that's where we are in America. It's actually quite sad.
That's quite depressing. But let's move on to something possibly a little lighter, I suppose. Do you remember Rachel Dolezal? She was the former leader of the NAACP who resigned infamously after it turned out that she had only been pretending to be black. Now, she's been in the headlines this week after it was revealed that she changed her name and became a school teacher in Arizona. And now it turns out that she's lost her job there because it turned out she had an OnlyFans account linked to her public social media accounts. Walk us through this one here. Should we feel sorry for Rachel Dolezal? Should she be allowed to start a new life, or was going out and posting, explicit pictures on her public social media while a teacher just too much?
Well, the thing is, this story is a big story because it's Rachel Dolezal, but it's actually a news story all the time when teachers get fired for OnlyFans. And I have to tell you, it happens a lot more than you would think, and a lot more than I would want. It is clearly a problem. I think teachers making extra money on the side doing OnlyFans is going to continue to be an issue because parents just don't like their kids' teachers being exposed on the internet. But sure, is it unfair to Rachel Dolezal that her past lies have made her extra famous in this case? Yes, maybe it's a little bit unfair. But, you know, those are the breaks. And again, even if she was a regular teacher who we've never heard of ever, it still would have been a news story. Maybe not quite as big a news story, but nevertheless.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's sort of that kind of bringing, you know, the profession or the school or whatever into disrepute here issue. But I want to talk, too, about this other crazy thing, you know, and I don't want to use the word insurrection, but it looks awfully like an insurrection to me. LGBTQ activists occupied the Iowa State Capitol simply because there was going to be a new bill that would classify gender based on biology. Have a look at this. They've occupied the State House there. We're seeing this more and more, and yet it doesn't seem like there's a lot of pushback against these takeovers of the institutions of democracy when they come from the left.
That's absolutely right. We are seeing this more and more. We had anti-gun activists take over the State House in Tennessee. This kind of thing just keeps happening, and they get a total pass on it. You know, it's not just these incidents, which I think, listen, I don't know why it's not an insurrection. They're in the government building. They're not supposed to be. They're threatening. They're yelling. You really don't know what they're going to do. But it's happening on a lot of different levels where we're seeing just no repercussions for anything. I think that's what's really scary right now in America, is that we keep seeing kind of crazy things happening, like activists blocking traffic, activists destroying paintings, or getting into yesterday, there were activists in the Capitol building protesting climate change, and then they destroyed the case that an old document was inside the Capitol building. And none of this gets the kind of reaction that we would hope it should get. We would like to see these people arrested. We'd like to see them convicted. We'd like to send a message to other people that we don't live in this chaotic society where this kind of thing is okay. But because they're coming from the left, they're getting such a pass from anybody who would be in the position to punish them. Obviously, if they all came in wearing MAGA hats, that would be a completely different story. But because they're not, we're really never hearing any repercussions for them at all.
And, you know, I think it's that sort of two-tiered way of looking at things that's so destructive. But there's sort of a lighter side to this, too. Well, not really lighter, but it's interesting because there's been studies. We had Valentine's Day this week. And apparently for Gen Z women, or Gen Z, a man who identifies as a MAGA Republican is apparently a huge red flag, with 76% of those Gen Z ladies admitting they would absolutely not go near a guy with those politics. Now, how is this going to wind up affecting this generation getting together, reproducing, when you've also got Gen Z men trending more conservative? What's your take on all of this?
Well, the women are either going to have to adjust to people who don't share their politics, or they're going to be alone. And that's really the story here. I think people's politics change when they get together with people. I would say that my husband is a recovering liberal, believe it or not. When we got together, he was way to my left. And now I would say in some ways he's to my right. Things change. And the fact that these women can't see a future where they can be with somebody who doesn't share their politics is unfortunate for them. In that same story you link, Stephen Green tells a story of his Republican grandmother marrying his Democrat grandfather and politically converting him. So, ladies, you can change him.
Well, there you go. There's some projects out there for people. Anyway, Carol Markowitz, thank you so much for your time. Now, Only in America is next, but first, how about a little Joe versus reality? Actually, though, this week, I think maybe we need to call this Dems versus reality, because here's the latest gaggle of Democrat congressfolk to throw down the gauntlet and say Joe Biden is the wisest, smartest, most together man they have ever met. Here's Eric Swalwell. You'll remember him from Fang Fang fame.
I would prefer an elderly man over an elderly man who's just chaotic and crazy and has 91 felony counts awaiting.
And then there's squad member Ayanna Presley.
In the report, it said that President Biden is an elderly man with a bad memory. Do you think that President Biden is mentally fit for office?
That was a partisan report, and President Biden has been absolved of any criminal wrongdoing.
Oh, and where would we be without the great Maxine Waters?
President Biden is absolutely fit. Trump is the one who is crazy. I think he is the one who's a liar. He's the one who has proven that he cannot be trusted.
You tell him, Maxine. Only America is next. Welcome back to the program. And now it's time for a little segment we like to call Only in America. Well, we all heard about the terrible shooting at the Kansas City Chiefs victory parade, but I wanted to highlight this man who tackled one of the alleged shooters, an everyday hero and the best America has to offer right here.
One guy was hollering, saying, stop him, or catch him, tackle him, whatever, and he's just bailing running. And out of nowhere, I heard that guy hollering, so I'm just like, okay, well, I'm right here, and I didn't even think about it. It just a reaction. I didn't hesitate. It was just do it. So I went to go tackle him, and another gentleman did the same thing. And as I'm tackling him, I see his weapon either fall out of his hand or out of his sleeve because he was wearing a long jacket or like a Carhartt. So when I seen that hit the ground, I'm like, oh, we got to take this guy down.
What a guy, and I think definitely a hero. That's all the time we have tonight. Until next time, bye-bye.